In this episode, I'll talk to you a little bit about food sensitivities testing, when you might want to consider it, and what type of food sensitivity tests are out there available for you. So, with why is food sensitivity testing important? Well, if your child eats foods to which they have reactivity, so if the immune system is reacting to those foods, they will cause inflammation. And this immune reactivity and inflammation can cause a number of health problems. So anything from skin issues to behavioral changes to just a general, having low level of inflammation just depletes the body of certain vital nutrients. So knowing if there's reactive foods in your child's diet is very important, so you can remove them so their gut is allowed to heal. So this is another very important thing. If there's gut dysfunction, and your child continues to eat foods that cause immune reactivity, then their gut, just the constant inflammation from those foods will just reduce the chances that the gut can heal properly. There's a number of things to know about food sensitivity testing, right? So the most common test is what is known as the IgG, so the immunoglobulin G test. These are very common, and they have limited use. So the thing about the IgG test is that your child needs to be eating the foods in order to actually for the results to be meaningful. So the immune system creates these IgG antibodies to foods over time. So if your child, let's say, does not eat avocado, there won't be any IgG antibodies in the blood that will detect reactivity to the avocado. If your child eats, let's say, egg a lot, and you see high IgG antibodies on a food sensitivity test to egg, then you can make a decision. Okay, there seems to be a lot of immune reactivity to eggs, and you can remove them. So what the food sensitivity test, the IgG food sensitivity test, can help with is, if your child's diet is fairly varied, it can help you refine the diet a little bit more, remove foods that they're reacting to. So what that also means is, if your child's current diet is limited, there's probably not so much value in running a food sensitivity test like this yet, because what you're probably better off doing is trying to expand the diet, and then after, let's say, 3 to 6 months, then you can run the food sensitivity test in order to see whether any of the newly introduced foods are causing immune reactivity. Another caveat is that IgG antibodies is just one of the various ways that the body can react to foods. So just because a food comes back as non-reactive on an IgG test, it does not mean that your child is not reacting to that food via another mechanism. For example, IgA or IgM antibodies, and there's other non-immunoglobulin ways to react to foods as well. So they won't be tested on this kind of test. So it's always important to get the results, but take them with a grain of salt. Always make sure you monitor your child for reactions after food, because that's one of the best ways, is to, if you see noticeable changes in behavior, for example, after certain foods, you have to use your own kind of personal, you know your child best, and sometimes something just, you know yourself, when you eat a food that it just doesn't sit right with you, you can feel it yourself. In your child's case, you have to kind of monitor for discomfort or behavior changes. So running a food sensitivity test is never going to be enough. You also need to kind of, stay fairly kind of aware and vigilant to see if certain foods are reactive for your child. Now, there's another type of test called the Mediator release test. Now, this is from Oxford Biomedical Technologies. It's Mediator release, or the MRT is what the test is called. So this is different from the IgG test in that the lab, they take the blood and then they expose the blood to various foods and food additives. Then they measure the immune response. So there's like these white blood cell reactions that happen, and they measure the actual immune response to each of the foods. So the beauty of this type of test is it allows you to see what foods your child is potentially going to react to, not what antibodies the immune system is currently producing, but what the potential level of reactivity will be to the foods and the chemicals. So the MRT test for a bunch of, you can test for 85, 130 or 170 foods. And they also test for things like aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, MSG, ibuprofen, and then certain other additives and preservatives like potassium nitrate, salicylic acid, polysorbate 80, benzoic acid, things like that. So with this kind of test, it's a great test when you want to expand your child's diet and you just want to reduce potentially reactive foods. So let's say you run the test for 170 foods and you see things like certain fruits and vegetables are medium reactivity, for example. What you would do then is not introduce those foods. You would start with all the green or the low reactivity foods, and then as you're you will work with your practitioner to improve your child's gut function, test for gut infections, just add a few supplements to the mix, things like digestive enzymes, probiotics, omega-3 fatty acids, multivitamins, things like that. And these will help to kind of heal the gut. So during these periods of healing the gut, you want to reduce as much as possible those highly reactive foods. So this is a great test to run at that point. So those are kind of the two tests I would recommend. In terms of, just to go back to the IgG test for a second, what you want to do is you want to make sure you go with a reputable lab, and I'll have some links in the show notes and on my website on good labs to use to run the IgG food sensitivity test, because it's very important that the lab has good quality control measures. For example, certain labs that I know of, they test the sample 3 times to make sure they get the same result every time, because less good quality labs, sometimes you might get a different result with the same sample, which is, it's obviously a waste of kind of time and money to use a lab like that. So there's labs that have kind of much higher quality standards. You want to go with one of those labs. So this is a quick primer on food sensitivity tests. We covered the IgG antibodies test, which is the most common test. As I mentioned, try to find, if you're going to run this type of test, try to find a reputable lab. And it makes the most sense to run this type of test when you've expanded your child's diet for a while, let's say 3 to 6 months, and they're eating a more diverse range of foods, or your child is already eating a fairly diverse diet. So if your child's diet is very limited, say 3-4 foods, there's no point in running this type of test, because it can only measure high reactivity to foods that are already in the diet. So if the food is not in the diet, the immune system will not be producing antibodies to it. So there's very little use for this type of test at that point. And then the other test that I covered is the MRT, or the Mediator release test. So there's one company that does this one called Oxford Biomedical Technologies. I'll have a link in the show notes to it. And what they do with this, the difference here is that they don't measure antibodies, but they expose the blood to the various foods and food additives, and they measure the immune response to them. So it's a good test to use before you start introducing new foods into your child's diet, so you can see what are the least and the most reactive foods, so you can avoid the most reactive foods. So I hope you found this useful. Check out the links in the show notes, and I'll see you on the next episode.